up to them. So I just kind of watch what they do. I watch YouTube videos and just pick up little things along the way.
Well, let's save some of this for our audience. I'm going to go ahead and kick off our proceedings. Bear with me, ladies. Welcome to the smartest people in the room. We are so glad you are here with us. And just by showing up, you are already demonstrating your very own smarts. Today, I am pleased to present three remarkably talented, creative women who rock right here in snowy Music City, USA. One is a Who Knew alum and is widely known and respected for 20 plus years in radio and broadcast TV. And the other two are incredible songwriters, performers, and published book authors who are doing some very novel things to promote their unique collaboration around recorded music in a book that delves into the history of Music Row. Before we get started, let me take care of some business. First, to the audience, please feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat window. The reason we do these webinars is twofold. First, we want to showcase really smart people and the amazing work they do day to day in the industry. But the second reason is a bit more nuanced. Many of you know that I am a music industry headhunter. I place music executives in roles throughout the industry. So by definition and function, I help people connect with companies. In this series, my goal is to help you make more connections, and I invite you to take full advantage of that opportunity. Specifically, I invite you to engage with the speakers and the other attendees in the chat of the Zoom. Please introduce yourselves, say hello to your friends, and make some new ones. And ask questions of our speakers. We will try to address as many of those along the way as we can. Also, please make sure your chat is set to address speakers and attendees. I want to thank our program sponsors, for without their help, we couldn't keep this free. I want to thank First Horizon Bank, Bufkin Baker, Four Roses Bourbon, the Fairlane Hotel, the Tennessee Entertainment Commission, Lightning 100, Tennessee Brewworks, Moo TV, Jive Printing, Project Music, and Cushmaster's brand of CBD products. So let's get down to business. In today's host seat, we welcome my friend Leslie Fram. Leslie serves as Senior Vice President of Music Strategy and Talent for CMT, overseeing all music integration within the CMT brand, including original programs, CMT.com, and music video airplay across all screens. Since joining CMT in 2011, she has negotiated key partnerships with major and indie label acts for world premieres and exclusive digital content. She champions new avenues to showcase rising acts, and 4 years ago launched the first female-powered initiative for the network called CMT's Next Women of Country, to give voice to emerging female artists that now includes a tour and digital performance component. Respected for both her hit intuition and hard-driving passion for music, she was the first woman to receive the TJ Martell Award in recognition of outstanding performance in the music industry in 2000, and was presented with NARAS Atlanta Chapter Heroes Award for her outstanding contributions to music and the music community. In 2009, Leslie was honored as a Lifetime Achievement inductee into the Georgia Radio Hall of Fame, the recipient of the very first Innovation in Music Awards held 3 years ago, and recognized by Nashville Business Journal's Women in Music 6 years in a row. Leslie currently serves on the board of the Academy of Country Music, the Recording Academy Nashville Chapter, Save the Music, the Nashville Film Festival Music Committee, and an alum of Leadership Music Class of 2014. Leslie's an avid philanthropist and spokesperson, using her voice to support numerous nonprofits and causes. She's also the co-founder of Change the Conversation, a movement aimed at supporting and promoting female artists. Welcome, Leslie. So glad you're with us.
Thank you so much, Tom.
And joining Leslie as her special guests are Granville Automatic, made up of songwriters Elizabeth Elkins and Vanessa Oliveras. Granville Automatic is a Nashville-based alt country duo. They are co-authors of a new book called Hidden History of Music Row, with a foreword by Kix Brooks of Brooks and Dunn. The book was named the best book of 2020 by No Depression. They released their fourth album, Tiny Televisions, in conjunction with the book. Tiny Televisions features new songs inspired by Nashville's lost history, including songs about the Trail of Tears, one of the city's first African-American business owners, the death of an Opry star, outlaw country, and a long forgotten neighborhood near the state capitol. and a 60s era nursing home on 17th Avenue. The band co-wrote the songs with some of their favorite songwriters in town, including the legendary Tom Douglas. The duo is named after a 19th century typewriter. The girls' devotion to the project has proved a chaotic road of back-breaking touring and interpersonal tension, former day job balancing and other band leaving, and a love-hate dynamic that brought them from Atlanta to Nashville. Theirs is a creative partnership reminiscent of Lennon and McCartney, a dreamer, doer, accessible, abstruse, country rock coalition of two polar opposites. What the two share, however, is a love for nostalgia, old records and antiques, tarot cards and dusty books, ghosts on battlefields, and lost histories from the past. That common ground has produced music praised by the New York Times, USA Today, and Rolling Stone. Additionally, they have written songs cut by more than 50 artists, including Billy Currington, Sugarland, Kira, Isabella, Wanda Jackson, and Angelina Presley. Their songs have appeared in dozens of television shows and films. Please welcome these amazing guests to the smartest people in the room. Take it away, Leslie.
Thank you, Tom.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you.
Wow.
Wonderful introduction. Wow, I felt so important.
I know. I was going to say, I was like, I wanted him to, cut it off for a second when he was talking about me. That was like way too much, but thank you, Tom. I appreciate
that's
that.
Beautiful.
So Vanessa and Elizabeth and I go way back. We go back to our ATL days. So this is going to be a lot of fun. And we haven't really had a chance to sit down and talk about their book, but first and foremost, I think people should know a little bit about your backgrounds that don't. Yes, we're definitely going to talk about this incredible book. But Vanessa and Elizabeth, let's go back to like the very beginning, like your first musical memories growing up. And we can start with you, Elizabeth.
I was back at the really awkward 99X event I played when I first moved to Atlanta when you said that. And I was like, wow, it was so great that Leslie and Steve Craig and all those people were there awkwardly seeing one of my very first performances ever. But it haunts me to this day. For me, it was always about just songs. I grew up with two parents who just love just a wealth of music, everything from classical to my father listened to a lot of Japanese instrumental music. He was very obsessed with that, but he was also obsessed with Lester Flatt and Earl Scruggs, and he was obsessed with listening to the Opry as a kid. And then they also introduced me to the Paul Simons and the Billy Joels, and so I just remember always being fascinated by songcraft. And then I tried to play piano as a kid, and saxophone, and picked up guitar. But it was just music was a constant for me as long as I can remember.
Do you remember when they were listening to the Granville Opry? Were you ever in the room when they were listening?
My dad would always have the latest crazy large radio that would pull in signal wherever we were. And I'm a military brat, so sometimes that was Belgium or Central America, or, it was lots of different places. But yes, I always remember that hearing, the applause and the introductions and just this very radio sound of acoustic songs coming through. So absolutely, yes.
Vanessa, tell us about growing up and just the first time you remember listening to music and being aware of music.
Oh man, my family was always a very musical family. My mother was a singer. My father was a singer. My stepdad is a singer. Like everybody's a singer. So it was amazing growing up in a family that supported music so much and just loved it so much. So my musical interests when I was a kid ranged from my very first record, which was Cyndi Lauper. Actually, she's so unusual.
Hey, mine too.
First record that I jammed the crap out of that record. Every single song, 24/7, when I was like 4 years old. So that was really the first record I wore out. But I also grew up being Mexican on music that was popular in Latino culture. So Selena was a huge influence for me, as well as a lot of Tejano music that was very, prevalent in Texas. So, and country music was also huge in Texas. So, so that's where that came into play, I suppose.
Did both of you know about the Cyndi Lauper connection a second ago? Because that was interesting.
We did know. I think we realized it within the first year or so of the band. And
yeah, I think so. That realization came about pretty quickly because she's such a genius musically, such a phenomenal singer and songwriter. and just knew a good song as well. She didn't write all
Yeah.
of her songs, but she knew a good song when she heard one. So that similarity, I think, we're sort of the building blocks when we first started writing together. I think we discussed that early on and how much we loved the songs.
And how she has grown her career. It's kind of like what you guys are doing, which we will get into. It's very interesting, the paths. But before we get into the next part, though, I have to ask, favorite Cyndi Lauper song? It's a tough
Ooh,
one.
man. Well, you know what? I would probably say, give me a second, because I have a couple and I'm trying to narrow it down. I think maybe All Through the Night might be my favorite, even though it's an old Irish tune. It wasn't even her song.
What about when You Were Mine? But didn't
When
Prince-
You Were Mine that's okay. That was my other one, but Prince wrote it. But again, she knew a good song when she heard one, and that is just, God, the melody in that song is so amazing.
I have to say Time After Time.
I was about to say, talk about songs holding up. It's interesting to hear those old records from the 80s and see which ones just sound of the moment and which ones feel classic and timeless. And yeah, that song holds up.
By the way,
Yep.
we do want to thank everyone that's joined us. We have a bunch of our ATL friends. Have you noticed
I was
that?
about to
Nan
say.
Fisher. Hey, Nan.
That's awesome.
Oh, wow.
Nan's
Holly
here.
Madison. This is awesome.
And
Hello.
Carlene Watt, I just saw her say hello to at the Bluebird. So yeah, lots of folks.
Thanks, everybody.
Jill
We'll get to-
Kettles, yeah.
We'll get to questions throughout too. We don't have to wait till the very end. So how did you guys first come together? Like, when did you meet and decide you wanted to collaborate?
So we don't really remember exactly where we met, which is super weird. But we really don't. Like, I think during the Park Tavern days and when 99X did the Sunday nights music in the park, I think Elizabeth had come to one of those shows, and my band at the time, my little baby band, happened to be playing one of those events. And I think that's where we originally met, although that could be argued, I mean, many times over, because I'm still pretty clueless about it. I don't remember.
I have a terrible memory.
Oh gosh, I have a horrible memory. But I think just running in that Atlanta music scene circle, it was so small. And I think we eventually just kind of met through that, and didn't decide to make music together until about 10 years later. So it was quite a ways after we met.
Yeah, I think for those that are on from Atlanta, I know someone just mentioned Eddie's Attic. It was a rich time in music for all of us, between Eddie's Attic and the old Cotton Club and all these historic venues and just the collaboration. It's much like what Nashville was as well. So that was a moment in time that I think we can all appreciate. And it's funny too, because a lot of artists, including Christian Bush and Chris Coleman and Dave Cobb, a lot of these artists that hence moved to Nashville and then we're all still together, which is a little bit crazy. So when did you start collaborating together?
Well, what year was that? It was about 10 years ago. And I had a rock band for a long time called The Swear. And, we had our ups and downs, our close to being signed, our you'll never get signed, or, don't quit your day job moments. But there was a time when the bass player, who's an integral part of that band, decided to have a family. So I was really in a weird mental place, not having a band that was touring, and we had just played South by and how did we initially meet? After we initially met, we connected at some point because I had started coming to Nashville. I, like you, was working a lot. I was on the board of the Recording Academy in Atlanta, and Michelle and everyone there was so helpful, made some Nashville connections. And I was coming here to write. And the bottom line is, I am not a country singer. I have learned to be a much stronger supporting singer in my Nashville years, but I'm a PJ Harvey style, 7 or 8 note range passion rock singer. So I started writing these country songs, and there was no way my voice was going to sell those. And I started asking around in Atlanta, I need some demos. I have no idea who would sing. And everyone was like, oh, the best country vocalist in Atlanta is Vanessa Olivares. And I said, oh, I think I know Vanessa. And
Blah, blah.
blah, blah, blah. That's what I heard that. I heard that from a number of people, not to compliment you too much. I can't build the ego much more. But we connected really, hey, would you mind singing some demos for me? Because I obviously can't. And she said, oh, well, my band just kind of broke up. And I said, well, my band is on a hiatus. Do you want to try writing? I'm doing a lot of writing. And we got together to write, and it worked really well. We started just writing once a week, and soon we had like 30, 40 songs, and a lot of them were story song oriented. I think we both, for me, I grew up listening to a lot of, also into my teenage years, a lot of Nancy Griffith, John Prine, Townes Van Zandt,
Wow.
these Leonard Cohen, these really story lyric focused writers who still are big influences for me. And I think we wanted to create something like that really was a focus on the story songs. And we call it alt country because I think it's not necessarily Americana, it's not country, I think it is alt country. And that just started, soon we were like, what are we going to do with these songs? And that's where the idea to create a band started.
And Vanessa, Elizabeth is just mentioning some great songwriters, like John Prine and things that the two of you were listening to. What were you listening to? What were some of your influences as a songwriter? Yes.
At the time, I think at that time in particular, I was listening to a lot of Ryan Adams.
Mm-hmm.
But as we were talking about a little bit earlier, I was also listening to a lot of things like Bjork and things that were very left of center. And I've always been a super well-rounded musical person. I don't ever discriminate in terms of music. I'll always give anything a chance. I love R&B. I love hip hop. I love jazz for certain reasons. Anything can be inspiring if you just allow it that space to be. So I think at the time I was probably doing what I do all the time and just listening to a little bit of everything. I think it just keeps you well-rounded as both a singer and a writer.
But what's weird is when we first started trying to make a record, and we actually tried to make a record here in Nashville, it was scrapped. We ended up making our first record in LA.
Yeah, threw it away.
But yeah, we were like, this is not right. But the go-to a lot was Cowboy Junkies, like Cowboy Junkies, 10,000 Maniacs. It was that almost that side of the alt country rock spectrum.
And if you look at some of those artists today, like if, let's say, Cowboy Junkies came out today, or some of the artists you just mentioned, where would they fit? They were played on alternative radio in the 90s and early 2000s, but would they be on Americana? Where would they be? So I think a lot of the lines have been blurred, and you're just talking about great music as far as I'm concerned. Yeah. When you guys started Granville Automatic, though, was there a plan of this is going to be about history and great storytelling? And what was the premise in the very beginning for Granville?
I think honestly, none of the songs we wrote in the very beginning and in the band's early incarnation were about history specifically. Most of the time, again, like Elizabeth said, we were really interested in delving into writing great story songs because we felt like that was something that a lot of people weren't doing at the time. And we missed those kinds of songs. And I missed, I missed the idea of being creative in a way that I wasn't writing the same love song over and over and over and over and over again. And I think one day I just looked at Elizabeth and said, we have all these story songs, but why don't we write a story song with a purpose? Like, why don't we try writing an album about war, for example? So thus started our slip slide into Civil War history. And the first record that we did, first record was kind of a mishmash. Second record, actually third record, was all Civil War. So that kind of started the idea of really conceptualizing albums in our head, trying to figure out, where needed the most attention. Nashville sort of came from that idea, like, where do we go next? We've got an album already written and ready to go all about Texas history, a ghost story album that we've been working on. So I feel like the coolest thing about this band is the ability to take it wherever we want to take it, no matter the influence. It's just nice to be able to delve into stories and history and really get into something very different than your typical day-to-day songwriting.
And if anyone has any questions as we go along, because the history element is really remarkable, because you're not making it easier on yourselves, because you're having to do a lot of research. And before we talk about this book, what about doing that Civil War record? Because you had to do a lot of research for that.
Absolutely, we did.
Yeah, and it was interesting because that first record, again, had some history songs, some not, but definitely really more of that almost classic, California country vibe.
Mm-hmm.
But I can actually remember we were on 85 North at like a Duluth exit when Vanessa said, you should write a record about war. And I think that came from, I'm such an avid reader, and I'm always reading nonfiction books. And I kind of go through periods where I'll read nothing but World War I for a year and nothing but the Civil War for a year. And I get kind of obsessed with learning and trying to understand that part of history. And we were also living in Atlanta at the time. And the route from my parents' house in Alabama to Atlanta, every day I was driving Moreland Avenue through Little Five Points anytime I commuted. And it dawned on me all of a sudden that this was the front line of the Battle of Atlanta, and that I had spent so much time driving over this land but didn't recognize it. And so I started getting really fascinated with what stories we were missing and what landscapes had disappeared across the country. And it was important to us, and I think one thing that Vanessa is so great at doing that I fail at is having imagination. I can be very bad about having imagination. I get very tied up with the facts. I want to know the facts. And Vanessa's like, wait, we need to really look at this in a different way. Let's look at this from a perspective of a piece of furniture that watches the Union soldiers walk by, then watches Confederate soldiers walk by, and what is happening in a house that changes hands 40 times across 5 years. Let's write from the perspective of a horse. Let's write from the perspective of a child. Let's write from the perspective of so many different things. And I think we've continued to expand on that as songwriters. It's very challenging, but it's really invigorating intellectually to try to do it. But that Civil War record, actually at the time, the Civil War Trust worked with us to really look at some little known stories from the war and stories that people don't talk about. And we wanted to zoom in on those very human stories, not the bigger, here's what happened in this battle. But one of the greatest villains of the war is John Chivington. And so we looked at the Battle of Glorieta Pass, New Mexico, and he went on to slaughter many Native Americans. He made terrible decisions, awful guy. And what the hell was he thinking? And how do we write about what he's thinking? So it becomes like, again, writing, I'm used to writing that power rock song, anger, revenge, love, hate, but here was this, wow, we're going to try to tell these stories in a way that engages people to think more about history, and the human element of history and the minute emotion that these events create. So credit to Vanessa really for the one of thinking, how do we make this something different? So yeah, it's been a really interesting process as a songwriter.
It's
I'm really good at coming up with ideas. I'm not good with the follow.
The execution is
difficult. That's where Elizabeth comes in.
That's what makes you guys a great pair. And I do want to talk about that because, it's the yin and yang. And so what makes the collaboration so great? Because you have differences and you also have commonalities. So, you don't want to think exactly alike. So what makes this collaboration so beautiful? Vanessa, you take this one.
Yeah, take it.
Oh Lord, is it beautiful? Sometimes it's great. I think that in the past, if you look at history, again, looking at history, and you think about all of these wonderful bands throughout history, we had the Beatles, we had the Eagles, we had Fleetwood Mac. Conflict is something that can break up a band or it can make a band. And if you use the emotion within the band, which is sometimes just absolute anger, occasionally you're just so irritated in the car, you just want to gouge their eyes out with a spoon or a plastic fork that you're eating your gas station food with. But if you really allow it to be the driving force and allow those differences the space to really breathe and say, man, we look at things and we do things a completely different way, but let's figure out how those can make us stronger as a band. The Eagles figured out a way to do that. Fleetwood Mac figured out a way to do that. And yes, all of those bands throughout history have broken up over time. But what would happen if they didn't break up? Think about how amazing, they would have been and how much they did persevere over time, of course, and everybody ended up doing things together. But we have really maintained that mentality of like, let's just persevere, even though we hate each other sometimes and we want to kill each other. It's a great partnership because she is really great at the things that I suck at. And I am really great at the things she sucks at. So together we suck a little less.
I think you just talked about most marriages, basically.
I know, basically.
It's so weird because we have done so much over a decade to channel that. We've gone from it just being a mess to being able to channel things in a healthier way. But we actually had a fight driving around about 2 weeks ago that I was like, wow, this feels so familiar. And I couldn't decide if it was like good or bad. But yeah, she's right though. It is that we do the things the other person can't do, which is helpful. And we've actually started now, this last record we self-produced, which I think the last two we self-produced. And I think some of that is being here on Music Row and getting to know some of these great players and knowing how to put together the right band. We mixed some Music Row folks with some of our friends from Atlanta who came up and played, and kind of had this punk rock meets Music Row band, which we were so fortunate to get that group together. But knowing where my strengths are in production and where Vanessa's are, I'm not even allowed in the studio on vocal day. Vanessa's got that covered. She can arrange harmonies. It's go home, Elizabeth, your work here is done. But I do think it's been that balance. So it's so awesome to see all these folks from Atlanta.
I know.
Yeah, and hey, Jim Riley, who was.
I know, I saw Jim check in.
It's how we met, like half of everyone we know.
Oh yeah.
Just so you know, Jim Riley is a producer in town, a songwriter. I have looked at who I met and everyone I've met since, and almost 80% of those people go back to a connection Jim made. So
that's great.
It's so wonderful that those little connections turn into so many wonderful.
It's 6 degrees of Jim Riley.
Well, I love that you mentioned the Nashville, Atlanta to Nashville connection, and you also said Music Row. So really want to delve into this book about Music Row. What was your first impression of Music Row? Because when I moved here 9.5 years ago, before that, when I lived in Atlanta and would come to Nashville, I mean, it was this magical place. And you heard all the stories and the historic venues and the historic, RCA Studio A and B. So before we get into this book, I definitely want to talk about what was your first impression of Music Row?
The first time I came to Nashville was in the early 90s to play the Bluebird, way before I should have. It was way too soon, but it was exciting. But I think we drove along Demumbrum at the time and saw the shops and stuff. But my first actual in-office meeting in Music Row, and I remember exactly where I was going around the Musica statue. I had just finally, with my rock band, gotten so much traction happening. I felt like something was going to happen. And I was meeting with a man who is now mine and Vanessa's attorney, Mr. Jim Zumwalt, who is incredible.
Woo-woo.
And
Zummy,
I was driving to a meeting with Zummy and his son, and my drummer called and quit the band right as I pulled onto Music Row. So that was my first moment on 17th Avenue, was just when you think it's all going to work, somebody quits. And that's the story of being in a band, I think. So,
Vanessa, do you have any first impressions of Music Row?
Man, I mean, I remember the first time I ever came here thinking, this is going to be the most magical experience of my life. Oh my God, I can't wait. And I show up and I was like, this looks like a bunch of old houses. I'm confused. So I think my first real emotion that I felt about Music Row was just confusion in general. And I think that emotion.
I still have that. That's the same.
Changed itself
What's going on here?
even now.
What made you guys decide that you were already doing historical things, writing a record about, the Civil War. So what made you decide to write this incredible book, Hidden History of Music Row?
Well, the through line from the Civil War album to the Hidden History of Music Row is a strange trip where we got together with some incredible band called the Henningsons to write a history song. And we wrote a song that Billy Currington cut and made a single unexpectedly.
And you had a hit with that. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And that led to a deal with BMG, which was an absolutely extraordinary experience. I miss it every day. Shout out to Daniel Lee, who was an incredible creative person to have on the team. And that led to us creating an album called Radio Hymns. we ironically made our Civil War album in Brooklyn with a man by the name of Gary Maurer, who's in a band called Hem, H-E-M. And we made that.
One of my favorite bands.
Yeah, we made that record up in Brooklyn, and when we were there, we started thinking about disappeared buildings in New York City, and we actually have started that record. Had a chance to write with some incredible folks up there, and we're driving into BMG. The BMG deal was a big surprise to us both. We're driving in one day, and Vanessa goes, "Look around. This entire city is a crane right now. What are we losing here? Put the brakes on. Let's think about what we've lost here." And at the same time, we started hearing about how haunted the building, the old Decca building that is the BMG writers' rooms was in, and learned that there was a hanging in that parking lot in 1865. And that just kind of all came together in this moment of, we're having this incredible experience writing for country and country radio, but that's not necessarily what we do. Let's try to put all this together and collaborate with some people we've met during this process and tell stories from Nashville's lost history. That record came out, and an editor saw an article about it in the Bitter Southerner, reached out to one of his writers, Mr. Brian Allison, whose dad was part of the founder of the CMA.
Allison.
Yeah, Joe Allison, and said, "How about if those two girls would write a book with you?" And we thought, oh my God, how in the world are we going to write a book together? And then the process began.
And by the way, to rave reviews, so congratulations.
Thank you.
How long did it take? Like, what was the process like? Because you had a lot of research to do and a lot of stories that were really hard to find out about.
It took all of us a little bit different time, depending on when they started. So let's just talk about this for a minute. I'm going to talk about this as kindly as possible. So with Elizabeth and I's very different personalities also come some downfalls, such as my complete lack of focus and inability to concentrate and get things done in a timely fashion. And I just love to procrastinate. So I waited, let's see, we got the contract for the book in March, I think is when we signed the contract. And it was due in December. And I waited until about October to start mine. Elizabeth had been working on hers the entire year, which is really, in retrospect, the smarter thing to do. And what I should be doing for the next book now that I still haven't done.
Already talking about the next book. Okay.
I know. Woo! Well, it's
Hey,
happening.
a shout out to Carla Morton, who is she's joined in the chat. And Carla,
Oh, hey.
Hi, Carla.
a Texas poet laureate and an incredible writer. So it's great to see her. And Catherine, you asked, no, you can get the book on our website. If you go to granvilleautomatic.com, you can click on store and we sign it. So we always would rather you do that. But yeah, the band almost broke up over the book for sure. We got together with Brian, who has written books before. We divided up chapters based on who will excel in this area, who already knows a good bit about this. The real interview focused stuff, Vanessa's way more of a people person than I am. I'd rather be in the archives looking up old stories. We divided it up, and it was divide and come back together about a month before and hope we hit the target with word count and editing together a little bit stylistically to make. I love that a review said it feels like a writer's round, like everyone's writing a different chapter. And so I think in a way we managed to make that work. But yeah, we were on a 2-week tour with the awesome New York singer-songwriter Anna Rose. And it was about 2 weeks before the book was due. And that's when Vanessa was trying to finish hers. My part was done. So there was a good screaming match somewhere near Durham, North Carolina, somewhere. I don't know.
It's interesting too, because there's so much about the city and about Music Row that I had no idea, some of the these rich stories. And I want to talk about some of the chapters, but let's talk about Timothy de Montbrien. I mean, that first chapter will blow your mind. If you had to sum him up in one word, maybe notorious, I don't know, but talk a little bit about that gentleman and what he represented for this book and for that area, quite frankly.
You know, that he's a tough one to sum up in one word. And
Yeah,
I was
he is.
fascinated because if you go to Music Row, you have to drive on Demumbrum Street. And, you know, people call it Demon Spawn.
Demon Spawn.
Yeah. And it's just this weird word. And I thought, you know, I'm so used to this, you know, you don't see a French word in Tennessee that often. And what the heck is this about? So I started figuring out Timothy, and, you know, the resources are interesting. I mean, you have to go back to Montreal sometimes, and all around Kentucky, Illinois, the old French territory. He basically was one of the first French fur traders to be here. And he allegedly lived in a cave. He allegedly had a wife that might have been part Native American, and another wife back in Kaskaskia, Illinois, and potentially 3 or 4 other wives. Children with all of them, and sort of this adventurer slash French conceited kind of, I get what I want, you know, we survive and we sleep with the women kind of approach, which
It was a character.
to me, I joke that he set the standard for Music Row in 1760. Because I think there is that element. You know, I think we've all seen that dangerous topic, but we certainly have seen that almost cavalierness happen with personalities on Music Row. So I think he sets the book up well. Like
I do too, and I think that was the brilliant thing that you did after each chapter. Is you really tried to tie it into modern day Nashville, but also the art of songwriting and what songwriters go through. You also had a companion piece that went with this book, musical companion piece. And I don't know, Tom, if you were able to get any of, we maybe wanted to play a couple of the songs that Vanessa and Elizabeth could talk about, but you had Tiny Televisions, which was the companion piece, but I'd like to talk about a couple of those songs.
Sure.
Tom, do you have Ice Cream or Tiny Televisions?
Which one you want?
I'd love to start with Ice Cream and have the ladies tell us a story about that, because it's really interesting.
All right, I'm gonna play a little bit of it. You tell me when to turn it off.
Okay.
Can you hear it?
Yes.
Paint me in a corner like they do across the street. Hang me like a secret, like a stone wall in Belmead. I don't think that anyone knows where I live. They don't like the taste of my name burning on their lips. So give me a light when we come apart. Give me a ride on the streets after dark. And I'll give you ice cream for a penny. And sugar in the back room is so good for the soul. Another something you can run to. I guess we're all bought and sold.
Tell us a story about Ice Cream.
You know, this is a song that we started when we were working on Radio Hymns, which was the 2018 album. And this is a story that I think, in our effort to get people talking about stories they don't talk about, this one was really important. And it's the story of Sarah Estelle, who was one of the first African-American business owners in Nashville. And she had an ice cream shop down on what is now 5th in downtown. And she was one of, obviously, a free Black woman. And she would make the ice cream for all the big political parties, all the churches. So there's this element of, she's so accepted in society, and ice cream is such a happy thing, but what's going on is such a terrible thing.
Mm-hmm.
And records actually show that she had to own her husband to keep him from being sold into slavery. So this was a challenging one for us to try to get the perspective on, but wanting people to see this, what you see on the outside, this happy thing, ice cream, is really a very terrible, frightening part of Nashville's history. And so we kind of attempted to show that what you see on the surface and this, oh, we love having you at the party, we love you, we love your ice cream, you're so popular, but also we're, enslaving the bulk of African Americans in Tennessee. So I think this was a difficult song to write, but I'm glad we want to talk about these stories now more than ever, which is important. So
I really wanted to know more about her. Yes.
We wanted to capture the emotion of the fear she must have felt to be, a Black female business owner, in those times and now. I mean, it's so crazy because that song really does speak to the current period as well. So that was an important thing for us to write about. And we're glad that, man, he brought such a great idea to the table. What a great guitar player.
Thank you, Carla. Carla just said, these girls have the ability to bring history to life. And absolute gorgeous music and amazing lyrics. It's so true.
Thanks.
Let's do another one from this. And I'd really want to encourage everyone to listen to this wherever you get your music, Tiny Televisions, which is the companion piece. Let's listen to a little of Tiny Televisions.
Sure.
Whoops.
That's okay.
That's a
the guitar riff is the most important part of that song.
The only way home tonight, fourth floor window is a stairway to heaven. Sister Jane, she smiles at me, 'cause she knows that I'll never leave. I do my time, counting sheep and seconds.
Just keep singing, Vanessa. Take it.
That's a Spotify problem.
That's okay. Vanessa's just going to start singing, but
Tiny televisions in the chapel on the floor. I used to mind the static. I don't feel it anymore. There you go. Here's a little something. Sorry about the Spotify issue there.
Yeah. That song is probably my favorite song we've done because it gets to bring a little other rock and roll in that I love so much. But that is a story literally of the building that became Sony Music on 17th Avenue. It was the Little Sisters Home for the Poor, built in 1906, I believe. But by the turn of the century, when the United States implemented welfare, those Catholic orders for the poor had disappeared, and it became a series of retirement homes. And when the developer went in, when the building was going to be sold, when the developer went in, he told me a story. His name's Steve Armistead. He told me a story of going in there and walking into the chapel area. And there he saw a bunch of elderly folks sitting on the floor, sitting on the chairs, watching tiny televisions. And he said it was like something of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. It was. Wow. He said, I felt good that the situation was ending. People had jumped out of the fourth floor window. It just had sort of a very it degraded into a very bad situation. And so we really tried to write this song in a way of what is this person thinking as they're staring at a tiny television. And we set this in the mid-60s. So they're seeing these images of the Vietnam War. They're seeing images of the protests that were happening in the mid and late 60s. They're seeing the MLK Jr. news. And it was weird because this was written with the incredible Matt Nolan, who plays keyboards with us sometimes. It was written in the fall of summer of 2019.
God, it feels so long ago.
I know. But listening to it now, especially the bridge, which is one of my favorite things we've done, it feels almost like this weird 2020 thing happening in it. But yeah, it's one of my favorite songs for sure.
One of the chapters that I thought was really haunting and such a depressing story was Jacob Schnell. He was the German Austrian of descent that came here and literally built this mansion and was going to hold this party, sort of a coming out party for his daughters and his son, and no one showed up. They were snubbed, and hence what happened after that. Tell that story, because it ends up becoming the building that is now Big Loud on Music Row.
So the building is now Big Loud. It used to be Capitol as well back in the 70s before it was Big Loud. And there have been so many mediums over the years that have been into the building to try to capture and see if they can conjure any spirit. And a lot of people at Capitol said constantly, and the reason they brought a medium in there in the first place is because there were all these complaints of phones ringing in empty offices. And, somebody would hear a knock at the door and go to the door and there would be nobody there. Footsteps late at night when nobody was supposed to be in the building, just all kinds of weird stuff like that, just all that creepy ghost stuff. But Jacob Schnell was an immigrant from Germany, had this lovely family that he wanted to show off. So he built this incredible house at 1111 16th Avenue. Invited the entire town to come to this coming out party for his family, for his daughters, because he really wanted his daughters to become a part of society, get married off, meet free men. So has this party, has everything just decked out to the nines, musicians, everything is decorated beautifully, hors d'oeuvres. His daughters are wearing the most expensive gowns that he could find, and no one shows up to the party. At the time, there was a lot of just racism was prevalent in any time you look at it. And during that time period, people had an aversion to his being an immigrant, his family being immigrants. So nobody came. And so he basically put a curse on the house and said, I condemn this house from now on. No one will touch it. My daughters will stay here for the rest of their lives, the rest of their existence. And we are not going to touch a thing in the house. So that he left the house into complete disrepair, fell into dilapidation. The pipes eventually went out. There was no running water in the house. So it was kind of a Grey Gardens-y situation.
Very Grey Gardens, yes.
Yeah, just, urinating on the floor, just wherever, wherever's good. Didn't need a bathroom. But eventually they did get one room sort of settled for the sisters to be able to actually live, again, much like Grey Gardens. And one of the sisters actually died in the home and was left in there for about a week before they removed her body. So very, very sad. But I think they felt this obligation to stay there because their dad said that they needed to, and they were obliging daughters. So really creepy story. And if you get a chance, if anybody didn't know that story before, you should definitely drive by Big Loud now and see if you catch any vibes.
There's some defining moments in this book that I absolutely loved reading about, Bob Dylan doing Blonde on Blonde and Neil Young recording here. Let's talk about that defining moment where people started coming to Nashville going, wow, first of all, it didn't look anything like New York or LA where they were recording. And they would come to Nashville and see these tiny little houses and then realize they could make brilliant records here.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it really changed Nashville forever when Bob Dylan comes. And my favorite story from that time period is the Leonard Cohen story, because he's such an influence for me. And with the producer, I believe Bob Johnson, and I always want to mess up his name for some reason. He's at a party, with Leonard in LA, and Leonard's like, that's it. I'm done. My first record was terrible. I hate the music industry. I can't stand it. Basically, I've just, let me be honest, I've always just wanted to be as good as the Nashville songwriters. And so he goes, well, why don't you come to Nashville and make a record? And he literally gets a cabin in Leaper's Fork, and he writes things there like Famous Blue Raincoat and Chelsea Hotel. But you do have suddenly these outsiders, Dylan being the first, who are looking for this incredible sound that they can't get anywhere else. And they come here and they get to play with these incredible Nashville studio musicians. And of course, the studio musicians have this jarring moment with Dylan where they're used to coming in, playing a song once, go home, we're done, it's 5 o'clock, it's dinner. And Dylan's like, hey, meet me here at 2 a.m. and follow me. And he plays, Sad-Eyed Lady of the Lowlands, and they're hanging on for dear life. And I think you can hear that collision of styles and approaches happening, in particular on Blonde and Blonde, that to me, the further you get into that record made at Columbia Studios on 16th, you see that New York meets Nashville thing happening in every note. And I think that, and then Nashville was wide open. Once those folks came here and Neil Young shows up and makes Harvest in a tiny little house, it was forever changed.
It was definitely a shift. And then I started thinking, after I read that chapter, I started thinking about, 10 years ago or whatever, when Jack White came to town and started Third Man. And then you had, Kings of Leon came in, and the Black Keys. And then you had that whole resurgence. It's almost like history repeating itself. I know there's a great chapter about outlaw country, and Vanessa, I specifically wanted to talk to you about that. Loved that chapter, loved who you talked to. Are you a particular fan of outlaw country and that whole era?
I'm a particular fan of the outlaw mentality, which is, do as your heart feels and stray from the norm a little bit and don't be afraid to be your own person and forge your own path. And that's exactly what those guys did. They really came in and they'd been listening to all this great music in Texas and came to Nashville and said, well, why aren't we doing stuff like this? This feels authentic to me. I'm going to start doing this. And that's kind of where outlaw country came from.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think that I am a fan of outlaw music as well, but I think it has something to do with the mentality for me. I had the pleasure of talking to Chris Gantry, who is just this amazing songwriter. If you guys don't know him, you should definitely check him out. He's always posting this beautiful poetry on Facebook that just blows my mind every time I read it. But sitting down with him and hearing these amazing stories about that particular time period of Nashville, when people were being so inventive and forging their own paths. It was one of the most incredible experiences of my life. He's such a poetic guy, a real troubadour, and just a creative at heart, a true creative. So I think probably of any of the chapters, I think that was my favorite chapter to write, just simply for the experience of speaking to him and getting to sort of live vicariously through his stories and his triumphs and his successes and the magic of that time period.
Can I tell
the quotes? Oh no, go ahead, please.
I have to tell the very best story. And also, thank you, Michelle Schacht. That's really cool to see your
Michelle.
Yeah,
Hi, Michelle.
And we always joke on stage, Michelle, that we write these concept records because we never want to make it as,
That's true.
We're going to stick to it. But Chris Gantry, Vanessa got the interview with Chris. They had this incredible interview, and we met that afternoon to take photos of pictures on the row. And Vanessa was crying when she arrived, and her phone had deleted the entire interview.
No.
And, Brian said, "Welcome to being a writer, Vanessa." But Chris obliged.
Literally crying, calling Apple, screaming at the poor employees it wasn't their fault. It was just my phone decided to just completely screw up in that moment. But it was one of the most panicked times of my life. I had to call Chris back and basically like grovel and beg for an interview. I was like, I'm so sorry. Can we do this again? He goes, you can remember everything I told you. I was like, I don't think so, kid. You don't know me very well. So we got back together and I bought him breakfast and he gave me a whole nother interview. And I was so thankful for it because I feel like the second interview might have even been better.
Yeah, I think on that chapter, I'm going to go back and read it again because he had some amazing things to say and advice to songwriters. It was incredible.
Yeah, he's amazing. He's just an amazing person, just a real character and a joy to talk to one-on-one.
And then, towards the end of the book, you talk to, some of our favorite folks, right? Like Christian Bush and,
absolutely,
and some publishers and other songwriters. How did you choose those people to highlight in the last part of the book? 'Cause it was great. And you even talk about like Lainey Wilson from BBR.
That's right. Yeah, my Lainey girl. I really wanted to try to pick specifically one person from every avenue that I could, because there is this void of understanding with the general public and how music works. And, is it this luck thing? And sometimes, yes, absolutely. Luck, is on your side and you end up with a deal. But most of the time it takes a village of people behind you to really make your career the successful thing that it can and will be. If you have a team of successful and wonderful people behind you. So I found Ed Green, who is at Red Light, and he's in radio promo. He's just an incredible being to talk to, so knowledgeable.
Yeah, Ed Green, yes.
Oh my God. I mean, just the roster of artists that he's worked with is absolutely incredible. And that's a great read. So I wanted to explain to people how that process works, how songs get to radio. How do we get to that point of having radio success? Talking to Daniel Lee was also very important to me to show people what's a plugger? How does this work? How do you get your songs to the artist to get to the radio? So kind of breaking it down into these small steps for people really gives a better look into the kinds of things that we deal with every day, the kinds of people that we as artists work with. and the different jobs and happenings every day of these different managers and artists and publishers and radio promo people. They're all very, very difficult jobs and really work as this amazing piece of machinery when they all come together. So I just really wanted to kind of let people in on a little bit of that insight to be able to see the inner workings of the music industry.
Yeah, that was really important. And a lot of people are saying they can't wait to read the book. So
Yeah,
here we go.
good.
You need to pick this book up. You know, it's really funny. I have to tell you this because every year my husband and I, and you guys are friends with Lanny, we always pick like one book that we buy like 20 copies and give to all of our friends. And this was our book last year. And we just gave it to like artist friends, songwriter friends, and family. And people were just fascinated by these stories. Many of like I had not even known about. So it's an incredible book.
Well,
So
thank
I
you.
want to ask you guys what's next, because, you know, you kind of hinted around about 3 things earlier. And I was like, what? You're already starting on this? So what's next for you guys? Because you're obviously continuing to make it work in a COVID environment.
We are. Whew.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think for us, it is going to be a combination. You know, we were on the road doing some shows with the Steel Drivers right before the shutdown, and it was really some of the most fun we've ever had on the road. So I'm hoping that will return before too long. But we are in the process of developing a podcast based on these lost stories from Nashville's history that cover ghosts and murders and shitty things that the government has done to different neighborhoods.
Mm-hmm.
So that's in process. We're writing a follow-up called Lost Music Row. And we're also, between the two of us, we have 4 or 5 records about half written, and really trying to figure out, we have Texas history, we have the New York record, and then we have one about ghosts where we want to actually visit the haunted sites with our friend Carla, the poet laureate, and she will write poetry and we will write songs. And I don't know which one will happen next, but you know, I think that's the goal of any band, trying to find a way to keep making records, and that's really at heart what we want to do.
It's really such an inspiration for a lot of people that are listening or watching right now that are new and asking, you know, how do I make connections? You're following all your passions and you're making it work, and it's just one step in front of the other. Do you have any advice for, you know, any new artist that might be watching right now?
Well, I'll say, and you know, I'll be honest, I started in this business when I was 17. I thought by 25 I was going to have a record deal and a publishing deal and be a rock star. And it didn't go like that at all. And it was a lot of no's, and it was a lot of finding ways to do things creatively, to diversify what you do. And I think really, if you love it, you have to do it. Mm-hmm. And you'll get these little glimpses of light along the way, and you chase those around and until something happens. And for us, it was going to write a history song and writing a Billboard top 30 country song. It was putting out a record about something we loved and it turning into a book deal. It's just, it will not be what you expect. And you really do have to have a lot of perseverance, I think, and be patient. I'm hoping, you know, it'll always be very youth driven, but I think if you love music, that's irrelevant. And I think that's important. So Vanessa, what do you think?
I mean, you kind of stole the words right out of my mouth. I feel like be authentic, take every opportunity that you possibly can. Because again, like when we got the opportunity to write this book, initially I looked at her and I said, shit, no, girl, who do you think I am? Come on now, we can't do this. I mean, I say we, meaning me. I'd always wanted to write a book, but I thought it would be a fiction book. But we took the opportunity regardless, and we said, let's see where this leads us. And, you know, in my head, because I'm just like conspiracy theorist of my own dreams, and I'm constantly like, oh God, what's going to go wrong? So in my head, the book sucked, and we were, you know, nobody wanted to read it. And, but that's not how it happened. And we, you know, I think in the end, it's just about really putting yourself out there and not being afraid. I think we are all driven by fear, you know, to some degree, especially now. It's easier to be driven by fear because we're cooped up all day and we feel like, when is this ever going to end? But, you know, again, just take the opportunities, allow for the weirdness to come at you and say, yes, more weirdness, give it to me. Where is this going to take me?
And one of my favorite stories to tell, and I'll make it quick. I know we're at 6 o'clock, but someone told me, play, if there's one person in a room, you play like it's the most important person in the room. And if I never seen that more true than we've been fortunate to play many years at the 30A Songwriters Festival that our fellow Atlantan Russell Carter puts on. And we had a show, we were down there with our wonderful fiddle player, Bethany Dickolds, and we got a show at 11 a.m. in Rosemary Beach at a little restaurant. And we were all just like, why do we get the 11 a.m. slot? We were being like, we're not important. They don't care. We got a shitty slot. And then we got to the restaurant and there were maybe 5 people in the room. And we were all just, cranky. It's 11 a.m. And we get on stage and everyone's just pouting like musicians can if it's not, you're not the same. But halfway through the show, I look up at who's sitting at the table directly in front of us, and it was Rodney Crowell. And it was like, there is a perfect example of, we came in here thinking, oh, well, this gig isn't good. And yet we were doing essentially a private showcase of our songs for Rodney Crowell.
That's incredible.
So you never know when that happens. And that's one thing that makes Nashville special, is you never know when that will happen.
Yeah. And I think I did want to end with that by asking you, because there's a famous phrase here about only in Nashville. And it's so true, right? Have you had what was your only in Nashville experience? Because, you can be sitting at a tiny little bar and who's standing right next to you. Those things happen on a nightly basis, especially before COVID. I mean, we've all had those experiences. Can you think of one only in Nashville story?
We were playing, actually, this was pretty recent. We were playing over at the Old School, which is like kind of outside of town, really cute little venue. I don't even know if they're open anymore. But we got invited to just come play like a little 15-minute set. And we were like, sure, with a friend of ours. So we went and played. There were probably 3-4 people eating, maybe. And one of those 4 people was Brittany Howard from the Alabama Shakes. And I was like, are you kidding me? This is
right.
The coolest. So you really never know who's going to be in the audience. And you have to play like it's your last gig. And, that's what we do. That's what we try to do it every time, sometimes begrudgingly, but we do it.
Elizabeth, do you have a story, or was Rodney Crowell yours?
Rodney was pretty good. I mean, I think my favorite one is not really so much about us playing, but being at a show at the Ryman and some people getting shushed in front of us and their camera taken away by the usher. And it was Jack White who was being shut down. So I thought that one was pretty good.
Funny.
Thank you guys so much. And Tom, thank you. But thank you for your perspective on everything. And congratulations on the book. And I can't wait to see what's next for both of you, because you're both incredible artists and songwriters. And Tom, honestly, this outlet is so great for so many people. So thank you for letting us have this great conversation.
Well, right on. And thank you for doing what you do so well, Leslie. You are a masterful interviewer. And,
oh, no, I'm not. These are my friends. We just had a great conversation, and I'm looking at all these incredible comments. Vanessa and Elizabeth, so many fans watching. Aww. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you, Tom, for having us. We really appreciate this opportunity.
Yeah, Tom, this was great.
The pleasure was all mine, and I want to encourage you guys to keep doing what you're doing. It's smart what you're doing. It's so cool to see, historical music that's great on the ears too. So
thank you so much.
Please lean in and do the New York book, do the Ghost book, do the records that go with those. So, and come back on this program at a future date and show us your new wares, if you will.
We're ready. We got a new book coming out year after next year. So it'll be out. Lost Music Row will be the sequel to Hidden History of Music Row. So
we'll do a part 2.
Let's go. I'm ready.
Hey, thanks all you guys in the chat, and we're glad to come on your podcast.
Awesome.
Just reach out, and thanks, Randy Owen.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Tom.
Right on, folks. Stay healthy. Come back next Tuesday. We've got Paula Batson and Lori Jacobson, 2 of my, I guess, music industry communications and PR heroes or heroines as our guests. And so we hope that you'll come back and tune in and stay safe and warm and healthy. All the best.
All the best.